So welcome to the next installment of Conversations with Middle East Christians. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate having you with us. My name is Kat Brearley and I'm a program manager at Embrace the Middle East. I'm responsible for our work in Egypt and also in Iraq, which we heard about in our previous session. We're really happy at Embrace to be hosting these webinars together with CMEP. And it's my pleasure to introduce this session this evening. Before I do that, let me remind you that if you missed either of the previous sessions, you can watch those again on YouTube, on the CMEP YouTube channel, and I think we might be able to get a link in the chat for those. And we also have summaries on the Embrace blog, so if you prefer to read a written summary, that's available for you as well. And please do share those resources with anybody who you think might benefit. So, turning to our session this evening, we have two speakers, and as usual, we will hear from each of them, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So as you're listening, please submit any questions that come to mind using the Q&A feature, which you should be able to see on your screens. We will cover as many questions as we can at the end, so please jump in, let us know what you're thinking, let us know what you are pondering as our speakers share with us. And tonight we're going to turn our attention to Egypt. I wonder what comes to mind when you think about Egypt. Maybe the pyramids, the Sphinx, Tutankhamun, or maybe you think about the significant role that Egypt plays in the Bible, from Moses being found by Pharaoh's daughter in a basket in the River Nile, to Mary and Joseph fleeing with Jesus to Egypt to escape King Herod. Egypt is certainly a great destination for the holiday of a lifetime, and it's also a place of theological significance. But this evening we are inviting you to see another side of Egypt, to hear about the daily joys and challenges of those who call Egypt home. And just to set the scene, Egypt's population is over 106 million people. And of these, around 10% are Christians, making it the largest Christian population in the Middle East. The majority of Christians are Coptic Orthodox. And there are also other denominations represented, including Catholics, Anglicans, and Presbyterians. And Embrace the Middle East supports 10 different partners in Egypt working on a range of important issues, some of which we'll discuss this evening, including healthcare, education, women's empowerment, and supporting people with disabilities. I've had the opportunity to travel to Egypt several times and see these projects firsthand, and it's clear that they're having a really transformative, positive effect on people's lives. So I'm really delighted to welcome our guest speakers this evening who come from two of our partners in Egypt. We have Archbishop Sami Shahata and we have Dr. Ghada Barsoum, and they will tell you about themselves. So all I will say is that Archbishop Sami is the Anglican Episcopal Archbishop of the province of Alexandria, which covers Egypt, but also North Africa and the Horn of Africa. The province has a wide range of projects to serve people in need, and a number of those are supported by Embrace the Middle East. And Archbishop Sami actually joins us from Cape Town, South Africa this evening, where he's taking a sabbatical. So we are particularly grateful that he's made the time to be with us. And then we have Dr. Ghada Barsoum, who is advisor to the development arm of the Coptic Orthodox Church, which is called the Bishopric of Public, Ecumenical and Social Services, or BLESS for short. Embrace supports the work that BLESS does to improve the standard of living in communities all over Egypt, often in rural villages where opportunities and infrastructure are really limited. So as usual, both our speakers tonight will be in conversation with Reverend Colin Chapman. Colin has extensive experience, as I'm sure you've heard in previous weeks, living in, working in, and writing about the Middle East. So he's a safe pair of hands to guide us through this session. So without further ado, I will hand over to Colin, and he's going to take us through our session this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kat, very much. I'm especially glad that we're able to talk to Archbishop Sami this evening, since I've known him for many years. I first met him when he was a student studying theology, preparing for ministry in Wales. I could try to introduce Archbishop Sami, but I think it's much more effective if I ask him to introduce himself. So, Archbishop Sami, please tell us the story of your life. Tell us what you've done until this present time and how you come to be where you are now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colin. It's a great privilege for me to be participating in this webinar, especially for the churches from the UK and the US, taking part and really have an interest in Christians in Egypt. Well, as a young student, and I graduated from the Faculty of Engineering some time ago, and then after working for a few years, the Lord called me to the ministry. So I went to Wales to study for 3 years. I returned back to Egypt for ordination and ministry. Then I completed my studies by doing PhD in Birmingham. And then after Birmingham, I was in Alexandria for 20 years serving the church in Alexandria. And I was consecrated as an assistant bishop 2017 and principal of the theological school, elected as the assistant bishop and archbishop of the province of Alexandria in 2021. So that's very quickly my life story since I started the ministry.
So the first big question that we want to put to you is, can you describe the general situation in Egypt today? What does it feel like to be a Christian in Egypt today? Are there any things, for example, about the economic situation that we need to understand to be able to feel what it's like in Egypt today?
Yeah, if we start with the economical situation, things changed dramatically in 1 year, and the devaluation of our coin or the Egyptian pounds have caused a great crisis for many poor people. That's the economic situation. But Egypt is a very stable country. And as Christians in Egypt, we feel very secure now. We had some incidents some years ago, like 10 years ago or so, but now things are stable. And we're participating fully in politics, in what we want to say, not as a church, but as Christians living in Egypt. To just give you some idea of the situation in Egypt, just before coming to South Africa, we had on Friday, 28th of July, a long meeting of prayer for Egypt. And the theme of the meeting was, "Blessed be Egypt, my people." And we had 6 hours of prayers, and many churches came to join us. And this was broadcast on Set 7, which is one of the Christian channels, which you can tune in and watch in the country. So different pastors, leaders, priest teams, and many people from different denominations came, and we were praying for situation, and we praying especially for the and development of the country. The next day, we had the Christian Muslim Partnership and Study Center in the cathedral in Cairo. We have a sheikh from Azhar and a PhD scholar from Cambridge. They both came to speak about the social work from an Islamic and Christian point of view. We had a group of people, Muslims and Christians, who were attending the lectures. And it was amazing to hear that sometimes there's so much in common between Muslims and Christians in relation to development and how to help the poor, and the teaching of religion, which really encourages people to work together. So in many ways, the Christian Muslim Partnership Center helps people to understand that Christians and Muslims can live in peace and harmony in Egypt. So that's briefly the what happened just before traveling. But our vision for the church, actually, as a church in Egypt, living church for a better society. We do believe that the church should be a living church, discipling, evangelizing, going out, reaching out, reflecting the light of Christ, to be true light and salt in the community, but not for its own sake, but as a living church, reflecting the light of Christ. We are encouraged to be influencing the society to become a better society. How can you become a better society without really reflecting the light of Christ? So that's the mission of the church. We're not an NGO doing social work. And we're not a church separate from the community. But having these two entities together as a living church, serving the society and helping the society, Muslims and Christians, in so many ways, actually, we have different sectors in the church. We have medical work, and we have educational work, and we have work with refugees. I can expound on all these ministries, but that's briefly how we see our ministry in Egypt as a church serving the community and discipling and evangelizing and reaching out.
Thank you. Could I just go back one stage, though, Archbishop? We have a lot of talk in our country today about the increase in the cost of living. Why is there such an increase in the cost of living in Egypt today? What is the reason for the economic situation?
I think it was so difficult to have COVID-19 hitting the whole world for 2 years. And immediately after the COVID-19, we had the Ukraine war with Russia. So it's not so easy for us to cope with all these big changes.
Are you still able to buy bread easily in Egypt? We've heard about Russia putting a stop to the ships bringing grain from Ukraine, bringing wheat from Ukraine. Is that affecting you?
I think the government has been clever in trying to balance, because bread is very important for all of us in Egypt. And it's one of the very stable diets we eat every day in our food. So bread is very, very important. So the government has been really careful to keep the supply of food. And we try to offer help to poor families in our development centers, especially to the refugees we serve in Egypt. We have thousands of refugees coming from Sudan, and we distribute packets of food, like just small items like rice, macaroni, oil, sugar, things like that, for families who come with their children and they have no place, have no food. So we're doing our best. The need is great, but we do our best to help people in need.
And have you had many Sudanese arriving on your doorstep because of the troubles in Sudan?
Yeah, well, I wake up 5 o'clock in the morning and people are standing in the street around the cathedral, just waiting to come in to register and receive a parcel of food, which is nothing really. It's worth five US dollars, just little amount of food, but they can stand for hours just getting this food. This just proves that there is a great need, actually.
And how are the relations between the different Christian churches in Egypt? Do you have good relations with each other?
Yes, we have a wonderful relation with the Coptic Orthodox Church, and a member of the church councils, Egypt Council of Churches. And we actually leading the council for 2 years now, from February 2023. We have good relation with the Catholic and evangelical churches. So in many ways, there are mutual conferences, mutual meetings, His Holiness Pope Tewodros welcomes us in the monastery, St. Bishoy Monastery, every year for the clergy to spend the retreat. So we have the privilege of going to St. Bishoy and staying for a week in the monastery. So it's wonderful to have this kind of koinonia, fellowship, with all the Christians in Egypt. As Kat was saying, that if you're talking about 10 to 15%, you are actually talking about a very good number of Christians in Egypt. Of course, we don't know exactly the number of Christians in Egypt. This is one of the big questions we are not sure about. But maybe it will be between 15 and 25%. So
I'm surprised that you put the percentage so high. You said between 15 and 25%.
Well, this is what the churches are saying. Maybe
Yes.
you will hear people saying 6% and 8%, but
Yes.
I would imagine 15% will be a reasonable percentage of
Yes.
the number in Egypt.
Archbishop, you talked about Muslims and Christians coming together. When you do have meetings for dialogue and friendship, what do you talk about?
We have different activities for Muslim friends, like the social centers. We do a lot of education through the programs we offer. We serve Muslims through all the medical work and through the different activities we do. As well, the youth actually is through the culture centers. We have activities in the culture centers in Cairo and Alexandria, when we welcome Muslim youth to come and share in culture events. It's a way of really interacting with the community and bringing people closer to us, crossing the gates of the church to come to know us, really proving that we can live in peace and harmony in Egypt. We have an experience of living together for 1400 years. I think if the world wants to learn about Christian-Muslim relationship, they should come to Egypt and learn from us how to be living in harmony. Of course, there are times when it's not easy, when there are challenges and problems. But I think in the whole, I have many Muslim friends. Many Muslims come to the church for the cultural activities, for the center. So we have this kind of relationship within the Muslim community and the relationship between the Christian and Muslim community.
But when you have formal dialogue meetings and when you bring imams and priests together, what kind of subjects do you talk about? Do you talk about social issues? Do you talk about theological issues where Christians and Muslims agree and where they disagree? What kind of things do you talk about?
Yes, we do talk about social work, of course. This is one of the important topics, trying to build bridges. And the other thing is to hear Islam from Muslim scholars. It's very important for Christians to be hearing what Muslims believe and how they give the message. And sometimes we have good Muslim scholars who come and speak to us in the culture center and in the Christian Muslim center. And they are very accommodative and they're very good. They hear very difficult questions and they have responded very graciously to some of the questions. So we do have a dialogue, in a sense that the formal dialogue is dialogue with scholars who come to explain their beliefs, and Christians tell the Muslims about what we believe. But mainly in Egypt, we know each other and we know each other's religion, really. We've lived with each other for many years. So in many ways, we understand each other very well, but it's always good to hear from the other point of view and be able to discuss what really unites us more than what we, you know what I mean. It's not looking at the things which divide us, but to really find bridges and building bridges with the Muslim community.
Do you find that there are many, many different kinds of Muslims? I mean, if you look at the Christian church, we have incredible varieties and differences, but do you have a lot of differences among the Muslims? Do you have some who are very, very traditional? Do you have many Islamists who have a very strong political agenda?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because when people come to speak, you know from the speech where they stand and the religious beliefs. But as you know, Dr. Colin, of course, you're Islamist and you know a lot about Islam. Islam in Egypt is different from Islam anywhere. And we usually, when we invite speakers, we invite moderate Muslims who are really keen to build bridges with the Christian community. So in a sense, I was very impressed with one big Islamic leader was talking in one of the speeches, and he was talking about the Trinity, and he explained that the Trinity we have in the Quran is not the Trinity the Christian believe today. So that was really good to hear from a top Islamist, one of the leaders. I will just refrain from mentioning the name. I will, but he's a good Muslim leader who can come and argue with Christians, and he can take a step further in building bridges with us.
Yes, great. Archbishop Sami, so my last question is, how can we support you in Egypt? Obviously, there are projects that your church is involved in, but apart from praying, is there any way that we can be involved in advocacy, talking to our governments? How would you like us to help you? There may be between 100 and 200 people taking part in this session this evening, and they'll be very, very glad to see your face, and they'll remember your face and will pray for you, I'm sure. But please tell us, how can we help you in the days to come?
Pray for us that our vision for living a church for better society will become true in many ways. Pray for the refugees ministry. Pray for the deaf ministry. We have a deaf ministry in Old Cairo, and we have a school for the special needs. So there's so many things happening in Egypt. So pray for us as we continue to serve God and reflect the light of Christ in different levels in the ministry we do, medical, educational, and with refugees.
Thank you, Archbishop Sami. Alf shukr. So I think it's now the turn to listen to Dr. Rada. So Dr. Rada, as I said with Sami, I could try to introduce you, and I'm sure I'd get the details wrong. So please, can you tell us who you are? Tell us something about your own story.
Thank you, Reverend Chapman, and thank you for inviting me to this great webinar. So I serve as an advisor to Bless, which is, as Kat said, is the bishopric of public, ecumenical, and social services. We always call it Bless, and I think the person who thought of this acronym is just a genius. So Bless was founded in 1962 as the development arm of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and it's headed by His Holiness Pope Tawadros. It is a bishopric, so it's headed by a bishop, but it has more than 200 people working as staff, both in Cairo and in different villages and different dioceses. It has a very large number of volunteers, and I count myself as one of them. So I'm a volunteer at Bless. My story can be, finished in an SMS, so you don't need so much time for it. I actually started to volunteer at Bless doing an evaluation of the ICDP program, which is the Community Development Program at Bless. And then that was in 2019, and I don't know what happened since then. It's just, it's one thing after the other, but I'm very happy to be serving as an advisor to Bless, and to the Bishop, Bishop Julio, serving as the head of Bless. In my other weekdays, when I'm not serving as at Bless, I work as a university professor. I teach at the American University in Cairo, and I chair the Department of Public Policy and Administration there. I teach social policy, and I teach program evaluation, and that's what got me to connected to Bless. In my earlier days, I studied at University of Toronto, and I wrote a dissertation on the adaptation of the Coptic Church to the migration experience. So that's all about me. Let me tell you a little bit about Bless. Since 1962, we've actually celebrated 60 years last year, and Kat was there. She joined us. This predates monitoring and evaluation systems, but we went back and counted the number of villages and communities where Bless worked, and it has been working in 560 villages since its start in 1962. That's in 46 dioceses across Egypt. Bless now, what I can describe is what I know now. I mean, I don't know what was happening in 1962, but Bless now has a holistic set of community-focused interventions that are informed both by community needs and, more recently, the Sustainable Development Goals. Bless activities can be summarized into three main categories: health and well-being, and it's not just the regular good old hygiene and health messages, but broaching into more much needed areas like mental health, fighting substance abuse among young people, sexual and reproductive health. Child nutrition is a big thing now we're focusing on, and very much for the reasons that Archbishop Sami mentioned about rising food prices. We talk about communicable diseases. COVID was a test and fire. We had to talk about these issues, but also non-communicable diseases. So that's the whole package on health and well-being. And we do have a component as part of this program that focuses on housing improvement and, particular focus on water and sanitation access, to improve the access to water and sanitation. The second large set of activities focuses on education and lifelong learning. So, this focus on preschoolers, during school time, education support, and of course, adult learning and skills for work. The third component is economic development, which includes lending and entrepreneurship support, working with farmers in villages to increase land productivity, adapt to climate change, and adopt more sustainable practices in agriculture. So these are the three main packages or programs at Bless. Key demographic groups are usually children, women, and people with disability. Kat mentioned the work of Embrace the Middle East with the ICDP program. Embrace was also supporting Bless program on children, focusing on children with autism and their families. So that's, in a nutshell, who I am and what I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you describe the general situation in Egypt as you see it at the moment, and what does it feel like to be a Christian in Egypt at the present time?
Well, Archbishop Sami did a great job actually answering this question. And it's funny, we never compared notes, but I would mention the same things he spoke about. Coptic Christians make the largest population of Christians in the whole Middle East. This is the largest Christian group in the Middle East. And so, and actually we always say Coptic means Egyptian. So we're all Copts here. I mean, whether Muslim or Christian, all are Copts. And actually the Coptic Church, there are so many Copts in Sudan. And that's something we came to feel very, strongly after the crisis in Sudan, because technically there are 2 bishops in Sudan who are ordained, but we came to know that actually Copts in Sudan are the largest Christian minority there. And so when the crisis happened, we learned more about their problems and their presence. Politically, I think we are at an historical moment, with very strong ties between the state and the church, very strong emphasis on interreligious dialogue. This is probably in the first moment in modern history where you have the Egyptian president visiting a church on a regular basis every Christmas Eve to celebrate the Christmas Mass with the church. That's very unusual in Egyptian history, at least Egyptian modern history as we know it. You compare that to a very difficult time. Archbishop mentioned, Sami mentioned this, a very difficult time in 2013, when in less than a week, 200 churches and Coptic properties were burned. You look at this moment now, and most of the damaged churches were reconstructed. The government addressed historical grievances about building churches with a new law regulating this, not leaving the request to build churches to the the whims of officials at any locality. In every new project, there's a church built by the state. That's actually historically new in Egypt. Like in the new capital, there is a big church, one of the biggest in the region, built by the state. That's unusual. I mean, there are always mosques built by the state, but for the first time, we're seeing a church being built by the state. So that's on the political situation. I would say there are 2 crises that are basically defining, the moment now. The first one, as Archbishop Sami mentioned, is the increasing food prices and inflation. Egypt is actually one of the top countries in the world impacted by inflation and increasing food prices. You mentioned the war in Ukraine. Egypt relies on global markets for half of its staples. So the war in Ukraine has had its very serious impact on food prices, and of course, currency devaluation. And we worry about children's nutrition. Children is a very vulnerable group. So in October last year, we started to introduce, we do have programs on nutrition, but we had to really step up the game and focus on providing nutritious meals to children in daycare facilities. We had to talk to nutritionists on what would be the best thing to be offered, at minimum cost to reach as many children as possible and most impact when it comes to children's health. So that's one defining issue for our work and our service in Egypt now. The other big defining moment is what's happening in Sudan. So the conflict in Sudan has led to a serious crisis of refugees in Egypt. And as I said before, I mean, we knew there are Coptic churches in Sudan. We knew there are 2 bishops in Sudan. It's one thing about it, but it's another thing that they came to their mother church and said, hey, we're part of you. And so many of them are, the ones who come here are refugees with nothing with them. So you're dealing with, the Coptic community in Sudan as actually a upper middle class group. They're mostly educated. You have medical doctors, you have pharmacists, you have business owners, and they're coming to Egypt with nothing. And even with their credentials lost, because we've worked all the way to get the doctors working as medical doctors here. But then the problem is the government in Egypt would welcome them, but give us a copy of your graduation certificate. They don't have that because they had to leave without preparation. They don't have the original transcripts of their education. So that's making life very difficult for many of them. So that's the crisis where, a defining crisis for our work now. And, the church had to respond. We started with food vouchers. So we found that the packages are going to be very difficult to handle. So started with food vouchers, a card with £500 that they can basically get food items from a grocery store. And then we also had to move immediately to rent. So we used some of the church's summer facilities, the ones you go for a camp. We used them for immediate housing for people who had no place to stay. And then we're moving them gradually to rental apartments. We're working on providing furniture, working on providing care, healthcare support. And we're bracing for the big blow of supporting going back to school and education cost. And it's a service it's a true blessing for all of us, but it's also a service where we're learning the ropes, because it's very different from what we're used to do in our community development or our work with people with disability.
Thank you. My last question then, as it was with Archbishop Sami, is how can we help you? Obviously, we can support CMEP and Embrace that are helping your different projects, but other ways in which you think we as Christians outside can support you? We need to pray. We need to pray for these people. We need to pray for the people who serve. We pray for the peace in Sudan. This is becoming, I never thought I would pray for the peace of Sudan. I never thought about Sudan in my life before, but we pray for the peace in Sudan. We pray that these people who are displaced would go back to their homes, because they show us pictures of their homes and they say, this is where I used to live. And it's devastating. That displacement is hard. We know it. You read about it, but it's very difficult to deal with people who are displaced and have lost everything. So we pray for the people we're serving. We pray for people from Sudan, and we pray for the peace of Sudan. We also pray for wisdom, because you have to make very tough decisions all the time as you serve in this very demanding service. I should mention that Bless joined Bless is a member of the ACT Alliance, which is a coalition of churches that primarily includes churches that are Protestant and Orthodox churches. And we joined an appeal for support for refugees from Sudan. We are one of 4 countries participating in the appeal. And we ask you to, respond to the appeal. The appeal is on the ACT Alliance website by earmarking support for people from Sudan, in Egypt, or any other country. That's something I would say would be great to for people who are joining us. Heather, before I let you go, let me go back one stage. I'd like to ask you about your main job, where you earn your living. What's it like to be teaching social policy at an American university in Cairo? What do you teach your students, and how do you address some of the big social issues that you've been talking about?
It's always very difficult when you're teaching Western topics in the global South, because, knowledge is produced in the North. That's unfortunate. That's a fact. And you have to base your teaching in the knowledge that's produced in the North, in the global North. So you learn to contextualize the knowledge that you're teaching. You learn that not everything can be copied, that copying is very bad for development. And social policies, the fantastic social policies that were invented in one context, when they are carried as is to a different context, it's a different outcome. There's just going to be very different outcomes, because there's so many variables, there's so many changing things. What do I teach? I always try to strike this balance between what you should know from the textbook, and that you really need to be able to listen to your context. And so it's always a challenge that you're not just imparting skills, you're building empathy, you're building skills, problem-solving skills, because we're dealing with very complex issues. In public policy, we call the problems we're dealing with as, and this is a term from our literature, wicked problems. All these problems are wicked because there are no easy answers. You fix it from one side and you break it from the other side. So that's what I try to teach. I also teach research methods. That's actually my passion too.
And Reda, are you afraid that when your students have got their degree, they're going to try and emigrate? How do you try to persuade them to stay rooted in Egypt?
I can't stop that. It's actually happening. It's happening all the time, and I cannot stop that. And there is a drain problem in countries in the global south, and you have no right also to stop that. People have the right to move. People have the right to choose wherever they will be happy and finding their way in life. You cannot stop it, but you think maybe you should just prepare them for every context. Why do we have to impose things on them? But it is a problem.
Well, thank you, Reda. I think I would love to sit at your feet as my ustaza and listen to you.
Oh,
It sounds fascinating.
Don't say that.
But
Please don't say that.
thank you very much. Shukran jazilan. And I think I'm now going to hand over to Kat to chair the question and answer session. And I'm quite sure that people have been writing their questions and sending them in. So over to you, Kat.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you to Archbishop Sami and to Gada for their input, their reflections, their thoughtful words. As Colin said, it's really great to hear your experiences and your perspectives and to be challenged by that. People have indeed been sharing some questions. Some of them are similar, so I'll try and combine them perhaps a little bit. But we'll try and get through as many as we can. So the first one I think is interesting and something we've not really touched on. Somebody says they traveled to Egypt and they noticed that they didn't see many women in public spaces. And they wondered, did they miss them or what, you know? So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role of women in Egyptian society and how that might differ from the role of women in the societies in the West that we're familiar with.
Reda, I think we need to hear from you about this.
Well, of course there are women in Egypt. It is true. We have not just Egypt. The whole MENA region has one of the lowest rates of female labor force participation in the world. I mean, you look at the data from the World Bank, and it's very interesting that, you know, all regions of the world, women's labor force participation is going this way. But in the Middle East, it's like that. It slightly goes up, but it remains very limited. And they call it the puzzle of the Middle East. Why aren't women working? And some of the arguments are, it's because of the oil. The oil made remittances possible, that women did not need to work. And another argument was that social policies are implicated because jobs in the public sector allowed for some sort of a safety net. And this is actually changing. And I have a colleague who wrote a book that, you know, we are at a tipping point, that women's labor force participation is going to increase. And we're seeing this, but it's not at the regular pace as it has happened in other parts of the world. The thing is, I mean, changes cannot be seen. It's like, seeing a surface that's, very stable, but a lot is happening down there. And I think with the economic crisis, we are seeing more and more women joining. It's just not showing yet in the figures, in statistics. So there are women in Egypt. It's just they're not as present in public life as they should be. Archbishop Sami, do you have a better answer?
Oh, well, this is your question, not me. Talking about women, of course, women are everywhere in all public life, and they do wonderful things in the churches and the ministry. And I do believe that women are much better than men in really doing pastoral work and caring for people. They have a talent and gift.
Wonderful. Thank you, both of you. So a question now perhaps for Archbishop Sami to start with. For young Christians in Egypt, can you tell us a bit about kind of how they engage with the church? Do they engage with the church? Do you have a sense of kind of the vision that young people have for their lives and for Egypt?
Yes, that's a very hard question, because young people now, you cannot really predict with the social media and the technology. You really need to up to date with the latest technology. I think the most important program for the youth now in Egypt is to help them find their vocation in life. So training them through our centers, things like video editing, doing Photoshop, doing this kind of new things, just creating a software and all these kind of computer talents or skills. That's very important. In the churches, when the church allows them to really exhibit their talents and participate, many young people are so gifted, and they help in many ways in the ministry. I see them volunteering to help with the refugees, volunteering to work in the Christian Muslim Center, and in youth, and the youth work in the culture centers. They come to engage with Muslim youth coming to our culture center. So youth, we are a very useful population in Egypt. I don't know that statistics. Probably Dr. Ghada will be better than me in telling how many young people in Egypt. Probably 2/3 of the population in Egypt are under 30 or something. So it's very important. Youth are a very important part of our ministry in our churches.
Thank you. And Dr. Ghada, I don't know if you want to add anything. I know you've done some work on youth employment. I don't know if that's given you any insight into young people's dreams and hopes.
You know, and I think Archbishop Sami said that, I mean, finding a vocation in life is absolutely the thing you would hope for every young person. Having a purposeful life and knowing what they want. We want youth to be part of the church, not in any denominational issue, but we want them to have a strong relationship with God. That's what gives them meaning in life. But you want me to talk about my work? Yeah, we do in research is we focus on the negative for some odd reason. So we talk about youth unemployment all the time, and we talk about unfulfilling education that doesn't really help young people compete both in the local and the global labor market. So these are the things we worry about. But at the end of the day, I think we really need to adjust the narrative and focus on having how these young people need to have a meaning in life and have a more purposeful life. That's what I would want to focus on.
And I think you've raised an interesting topic there, which perhaps we can pick up because a few people have asked questions around education. I don't know if one or both of you could tell us a little bit about education in Egypt. What kind of teaching methods are used? How large are the classes? Anything else you think people might not? I mean, I know it's the holidays at the moment, so the children are not in school, as is the case in lots of countries. But when they go back in September, what will their schools be like? And what are the options for the different types of schools?
I think I can talk about education in the level of, I will leave Dr. Ghada to speak about university education, and because she's a teacher in the university, so she knows much better than me in that level of education. But education in the level of the diocese and the church, we have schools, and we try to really educate the children. Of course, you have a government curriculum, but using the government curriculum and helping the children to be creative in the schools, it's not so easy. but we do our best to do this. Education in the level of the development centers, when we have workshops and we have teaching and hygiene things and teaching mothers and teaching fathers, and sometimes the program Brace helps a lot with the projects for the whole development of the family. So we have teaching on the level of children and mothers and fathers with the family. And we do a lot of work with special needs and the deaf and the visual impaired people. So we try to do our best to help, because the deaf are as intelligent and they have talents as normal people. They just don't hear. Maybe they can focus better than those who can hear. So helping them to really discover the talents and going with education. And one of the problems we have that in our system, we don't have a special curriculum for the people with special needs and with the deaf. They learn the same curriculums as the hearing people. So this doesn't really help them to develop. So there's so much to be done in education. The number of schools in Egypt is much less than the number needed in Egypt because of the number of children increasing all the time.
Yes, thank you. That's a really helpful overview. Dr. Gada, would you like to add anything from your perspective about education?
What we know is that Egypt is bracing for the largest number of children in its history because of demographic changes. So there is need for more schools. That's on the side of access. And of course, quality issues are always there. There was a very interesting report, not just on Egypt, but on countries in the global south, that there is schooling without learning. So education is not about going to school. I mean, you could go to school, but there is no learning happening. So we worry about this, and it's a global phenomenon in the global south. We worry about children going to school and not learning. At Bless, we have a program that Embrace the Middle East has contributed to, which is basically we support with study support sessions, evening support sessions for children to basically be up to date. I mean, sometimes we just focus on teaching basic reading and writing skills because. And it's just not just in Egypt, it's in the whole global south. Children are moving from one year to the other because there's no place in the system. There's no space to repeat. Because if you repeat the next cohort, there are no extra seats for the next cohort if the current cohort repeats. So children are moving into the system, quote unquote, succeeding. That's what you worry about this. So one of the things we learned is that you need to basically teach reading, writing, and basic math for these children to be able to catch up, because school years are becoming more and more sophisticated, and the curricula are becoming more and more sophisticated. So you need them to be able to catch up, and there's no way on earth to catch up if they're unable to read the textbooks. So we focus on this. We focus on reading and writing. We focus on study aid. But it's a real issue. And there are hopes that technology can do a lot. One of the best models we have globally is Khan Academy, and it's the story of Khan Academy. It comes from Pakistan, where basically, I think it was a young engineer who wanted to help his own nephew in Pakistan by sending her videos on how to work on math, and then it became so popular. So we're having hopes that technology can really help fix some of the problems of education. It's not a quick answer. It's not the best solution and doesn't really address the whole problem, but yeah, there are hopes that this could be a solution.
And just to kind of follow up on that, I think people in the Q&A are keen to understand a bit more about if children are in school, and we know there aren't enough schools for everybody, but if children are in school, why are they not able to learn? Are there particular reasons? Obviously, some children don't move as quickly as others, and I guess it's hard to cater to everybody, but are there particular reasons that you could identify for us?
Well, I mean, I teach at the university level, and I would have 20 students in my classroom, and I call this work. If I'm a teacher at the primary level in a government school, I would have 60 students or 70 students. How do you manage that? It's just not easy. And it all goes back to a large number of students and limited resources. So you end up with the situation. What learning can you expect in an environment like this? And it's not just in Egypt, this is a global phenomenon in the global south.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. So to pivot slightly, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about climate change. I know it's very hot in Egypt at the moment. Archbishop Sami has escaped to the winter in South Africa, but Dr. Gada is trying to survive in the hot temperatures, and many partners in Egypt that I've been talking to have been saying it's so hot. And when Egyptians are telling you it's hot, it's really hot. So we know that climate change is having an impact in Egypt. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, and perhaps about ways the church is responding or engaging with that challenge.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, Archbishop Sami, go ahead.
Continue. I will respond after you finish.
So it started long ago when we had programs to help farmers. And at the time, all we could focus on is basically talking about agricultural inputs, seeds, fertilizers, and all that. And now the language has completely changed. What we talk about is how to deal with climate change, how to choose the best seeds that can handle less water, because water is a big issue. We have the River Nile, and everybody knows Egypt is the gift of the Nile. I mean, that's a very old saying. The River Nile, the quota for Egypt from the River Nile water is not enough with the growing population and with the evaporation happening because of heat waves and climate change. So you need to work with farmers on how to improve irrigation methods. You need to work on how to choose the best seeds that can handle less water, and how to handle the soil in the best possible way. So one of the things we're working on with farmers are texting them about expected weather episodes. I was talking to farmers, and so I'm very ignorant about farming, but I came to learn that you have to do, for instance, the pollination has to happen at a certain time. I think it was towards the end of the winter, if I'm not mistaken. So I was talking to farmers of dates, and if you have an episode of hot weather, boom, you lost the productivity of your land. I think I'm butchering this because I have to learn more about types of crops, but the idea is they need texting, and the Ministry of Agriculture does that. It's not us who are going to do this, but we believe that our role is basically cascading knowledge. So you take it from the ministry, you text it, text, because you have to be prepared. Something is going to happen. So what used to be a good old agriculture support, farmer support program is now shifting and transforming to a program addressing climate change.
Thank you. And I know that the church has also been working on these issues, Archbishop Sami.
Yeah, I think from the church point of view, we do a lot of raising awareness of the people in Egypt, especially children in schools. We had a program last summer when we had clergy and sheikhs going from the Christian-Muslim partnership to the schools and doing projects with the children, and really teaching them how to keep the environment clean and how to do these projects of changing the compost into natural gas, and how to divide the baskets for the garbage. All these things done in different schools in Cairo, in Minouf, in Port Said, in different places. So really helping the young people to really look after the environment. It's a big problem for us in Egypt. I think the water level increase, if the temperature rises to above 1.5, as you know, this will cause the water level to increase, which is really threatening Alexandria and the north of Egypt to drown in not very long time. So it's a crisis, really. It's a big issue for us.
Yeah.
And can I jump in and add one more thing? I'm very happy to see that the church did a declaration on the protection of the environment last year. Blas and the Coptic Church were part of COP27, and Archbishop Sami was saying, did we meet at COP? I'm not sure if we met, but yeah, we were all there present at the climate conference. And I was very happy to see the declaration from the church, more of a statement. You need to protect the environment. This is a clear message. It's biblical. You need to really focus on protecting the environment.
Yeah, certainly. And the church and NGOs were very prominent at COP, which was wonderful to see. We're coming towards the end of our Q&A, so I just want to encourage viewers, if you've got a question and you haven't asked it yet, please put it in the box so we don't miss it. I've got one more to ask our speakers, which is just combining a few things people have asked about. So coming back to the crisis in Sudan, which I think along with the economic crisis is, a huge, it seems to me the kind of the thing that Egypt is really facing at the moment, particularly, in Cairo. So many people are ending their journeys there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, because although many Sudanese are coming to Egypt now, there has been a Sudanese community for a long time in Egypt. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. And Archbishop Sami, if you could say a bit more about Refuge Egypt and the work that's happened for many years, not just with Sudanese, but also with Eritreans, Syrians, Ethiopians, many people fleeing violence. I think someone has specifically asked, and I don't know if you have the numbers, around how many Sudanese people are in Egypt. I think from the last news I saw, the current influx has been about 250,000 perhaps, but I don't know how many Sudanese people were already living and settled in Egypt. So if you're able to speak to that, that would be very helpful.
I think they come every day. So it's difficult to know exactly the number, but the latest statistics, I think the government was saying that we have 9 million refugees in Egypt. It's a big number, but not all Sudanese, but we have refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Libya, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from Somalia. So Egypt has always been the land of refuge since the time of Jesus. We do our best to accommodate. Egypt is not a very rich country, but when you have a crisis like this in Sudan and thousands of people are waiting at your borders, you cannot just ignore them and not allow them to come. I think many women and children have been crossing the borders in Aswan, and many ministries of the church went to Aswan to really give them food, clothing, and support at the borders of Egypt in the south to help. In Cairo, there's so many in Cairo. The presence of refugees in Egypt does not help us because this raises the price of food, raises the price of renting of the flats, raises the price of everything. So Egypt have many problems, and yet we are welcoming so many people to come, and because it's very important. We really do our best to help the refugees.
Thank you very much. And Gada, would you like to add from your perspective?
We don't know exactly how many are in Egypt. We all rely on reports from the media or reports from OCHA, which is the UN body looking at what's happening at the borders in different conflict zones. We do know that it's difficult. That's what we're seeing every day. We do know that whatever we do is coming very little and very late for anyone who is faced with this crisis of displacement. We don't know how many Sudanese were there in Egypt before the crisis. I mean, remember, this is a region with one conflict after the other. So Sudan, for instance, there was the war between the north and the south. So Egypt had so many southern Sudanese. That was maybe 10, 15 years ago. And there was the war in Darfur, and that led to a lot of displacement happening in Sudan. And now what's happening in Khartoum is basically the latest episode of the conflict in Sudan. Egypt has been the refuge land for people from Iraq, Syria. This is a region that's very troubled, and it's unfortunate. The Middle East region is very troubled with so many conflicts happening. And we thank God that Egypt is continuing to be the land of refuge for people with in such a difficult situation. No, I mean, I would say again, we need to pray for Sudan. We need to pray for the people from Sudan, and we need to pray for wisdom for this service to provide the best with the very little resources that we can have. Yeah.
I would like to add something about the refuge ministry we have in the cathedral. We have an office which welcomes the Sudanese and refugees in general, and give them clothing and food. We have a big program for medical help. We help them pregnant mothers, and we have HIV clinic and TB clinic, and we have a vocational training center, and we try to find businessmen who find work for them, give them some vocations. So so much is happening. Actually, it's a big ministry, and we have hundreds of Sudanese coming every day to the cathedral for support.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can see, but I agree with some of our viewers in the chat, really celebrating this positive attitude that Christians in Egypt have to this crisis, and wanting to respond when in our own country attitudes to refugees are often very negative and people feel they don't have enough. But once again, we're challenged by our Christian brothers and sisters in the Middle East to give from what we have. And so we join our prayers with yours for peace in Sudan, and we will be praying for you in your response to this crisis, and also in all the work that you're doing to support people in Egypt. We are coming to the end of our time together now, so I want to say a very big thank you to Archbishop Sami and to Dr. Gada. You have really given us an insight into Egypt, and I agree that many people don't hear or know that much about Egypt beyond what they see, in holiday programs. So we're really glad that you've shared some of the daily reality with us. And we know that everybody receives a warm welcome in Egypt. So if people would like to visit, see the pyramids and see the wonderful work of the Christian community, you would be made very welcome, I know, by the churches. And thank you obviously to Colin for his skillful facilitation and for guiding us through this session. And thank you to you for your questions. We apologize for those that we didn't quite get to, but hopefully you've learned something new, and maybe you'll go away and tell somebody else something about Egypt and about the Christian community there this week. We will be back next Monday. Will be our final session where we'll be focusing on Lebanon. Again, a place with many challenges, but many inspirational Christian organizations as well. So please do come back next week for that final session.